on the front of the room because there are microphones, so it will be better for questions and comments if you have, because at the rear you cannot speak in the microphone, but it's up to you. Okay, so thank you for being here for this press conference on the future of Tamil accountability post-regime change related to the UNHRC. We have the pleasure to welcome 4 speakers about this subject, yes, and I think it's important to hear you about that. So at the Press Club, we are happy to have you here. Before to give you the floor, I would like just to make you sign our golden book. Just a signature below the names, and maybe I will give you a little souvenir that's just something about cartoons we did there. Okay. And I will give the floor to the first speaker after the signature. Okay, so thank you, and now I will give the floor to Mr. Thirukulasingam Thiruchchoti. Please. Yes.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. We are today in this press club to talk about the future of Tamil accountability post-regime change under the UNHCR. Before talking about that, I would like to go behind on the history of the UNHCR. The General Assembly established the UNHCR by adopting a resolution on 15 March 2006 in order to replace the previous Human Rights Commission of Human Rights, United Nations Commission of Human Rights, which has been heavily criticized for allowing countries with poor human rights records to be members. On the inauguration of this UNHCR, Ban Ki-moon declared on 12th March 2007, all victims of human rights abuses should be able to look to the Human Rights Council as a forum and a springboard for action. People all over the world live in hope that in countries where the state, on the name of nationalism and religionism, uses all its mandate to crush down the rights of the people of a different ethnicity and identity. Sri Lanka is not different from this example. Tamil people, who are also indigenous people to the island, have been victims of state tyranny before independence and since 1948. Tamil's issue was brought in front of the Human Rights General Assembly since a long time, and it was brought to the past heavily criticized UN Commission on Human Rights, which failed to take action against the state of Sri Lanka. And today, we are in front of the UNHCR expecting justice. And since 2009, Sri Lanka has been in the United Nations with reports from the panel of experts, the Chalpetri report, which accepted that UN's failure to protect the Tamil people, in which it accounted 70,000 people dead during the last stages of war. The UNHCR's Council's resolution in 2012-2013, which was on the promoting reconciliation and accountability in Sri Lanka, which was not allowed by the state of Sri Lanka, which led to the March 2014 resolution with a request of the High Commissioner to undertake a comprehensive investigation into alleged serious human rights violations in Sri Lanka, and the investigation and testimonies taken mostly from the victims living outside of the island, as the state of Sri Lanka refused access to the investigations into the island during the period of August 2014 till October 2014. A report on the investigation was supposed to be put on table during the March 2015 session, but was postponed till September 2015 as there was a regime change in the island of Sri Lanka, and hoping that the new government will give access for the investigations to the island, which did not happen. On the UNHCR investigation report, which contains 261 pages, it described the crimes committed in between February 2002 till November 2011. The report went up to describing the methods of the killings, rapes, sexual violence, disappearance, and the method used was described as system crimes and also described as international crimes. The member states who had pushed through for the resolution in 2014 and a resolution leading to the OSCE report after the change of regime, which seemed to be on the opinion of many major donor countries of the United Nations, put forward a resolution in October 2015 praising the Sri Lankan state, encouraging it to make changes in its judiciary system and several other proposals, and also called upon an investigation on the crimes committed in the island through a hybrid system of investigations, and told to include international judges, lawyers, and other bodies. It should be mentioned that in his oral report on the 30th September 2015, the High Commissioner said that the judiciary system is not independent and up to standard, and also mentioned that he had reports that torture, murder continued after the election of Maithripala Sirisena in January 2015 and the parliamentarian election in August 2015. In this new government, which is described as a government of good governance, has anything really changed, and has the human rights abuses stopped? On this new government, I think we need to analyze and see if there are real changes. The actual president, Mr. Maithripala Sirisena, was minister in the Mahinda Rajapaksa government and was commander-in-chief during the last period of war in May 2009, and should be investigated for massacre of those who surrendered with white flags. The actual Prime Minister, Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe, was Prime Minister during the peace talks in 2002, and who played a big part using the period of peace talks, taking time to prepare the ground for the final war. Mrs. Chandrika Kumaratunga, past president and now responsible for the Reconciliation Commission, was in power, where the largest number of Tamil people were victims in rape, murder, and sexual violence. General Sarath Fonseca, who was the Army General, has been promoted to the highest rank as Field Marshal. Sarvendra Silva, Army Commander, nominated by the past regime, was nominated to the United Nations, and he is still holding his post at the United Nations. Jagat Dayas, another Army Commander, who was promoted to the Embassy of Germany by the past regime, had to return to Sri Lanka, was promoted to higher ranks in Sri Lanka by the new regime. We can go on with examples like this, which shows that the so-called regime changes is just in names, and also involved in war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, has been promoted to high ranks, and some to have impunity and protection. And after the October 2015 resolution, there have been no evolution, as the government has not respected any part of the resolution which was signed by the government itself. Political prisoners are still in prison, Lands are controlled by more than the 150,000 military still in the position in the north and another 30,000 in the east, and have colonized Tamil people's land and are controlling the economy of the region, which also leads to sexual abuses in the region, where there are around 90,000 war widows. In a time where we are expecting an oral report by the High Commissioner, we like to mention that since years, the human rights abuses against the Tamil people is continuing, and after the killing of more than 100,000 people during the last period of war, those who were killed during the past regimes, including the period of Mrs. Chandrika Kumaratunga and Mr. Ranil Wickramasinghe, should be taken into account. And also, those who have been disappeared should be taken into account. In a recent speech during the Thaipongal 2016 festival, an important day for the Tamils in Jaffna, the Prime Minister declared that those disappeared are dead. We should imagine the amount of cruelty of the Prime Minister to say so in that day to the people that those their beloved has been killed. The Sri Lankan state has not changed during all these 67 years and more years after, and the accountability of the Tamil people should not be used as methods in changing regimes, because the UN and the international community, the so-called international community, has been using Sri Lanka, the crimes committed against the Tamil people to make regime change in the country and not proposing a political solution to the people. And more than that, the question comes on sovereignty, where we see countries saying that the UN or any other authorities cannot involve into sovereignties of states. So the question is, does the country have total impunity on crimes committed by the state itself? Does the sovereignty protect the countries from the crimes committed by itself? As Tamils were victims of the state system, which was the cause of the crimes reported in the OSL report of 261 pages, we can still count for thousands of pages like this, which shows the mass killings and genocide which is going on still in the island. So we are here to talk about accountability on this post-regime, and will the UNHCR promote real, true justice and peace for the people. Thank you.
Thank you for this introduction. Now I have the pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Kisten.
Thank you for the authorities to give me this opportunity. As I have come from the ground, here I can speak about the current scenario of Sri Lanka under this topic. There's no second thought that the regime change is an important factor in the history of Sri Lanka. No one can deny that the basic democracy has been restored with the regime change after 2015 January 8. However, the democratic structure that has been restored has nothing to do with the basic rights of ethnic minorities and reconciliation. It has been built on singular Buddhist chauvinistic mindsets, which the ruling class of Sri Lanka needs to win the hearts of the majoritarian voters. The democratic forces in Sri Lanka needs to win the hearts of common singular people who are the important factor in this equation. Until then, the regime change will not be democratic and will not assume the basic rights of the ethnic minorities. In this scenario, the current Sri Lankan government tries to create business environment where it needs to resume fundamental democratic structure. Of course, it saves for big businesses, big corporations, and foreign investments. Therefore, a common Sri Lankan man enjoys the part of the democracy which has been structured only for the above-mentioned business-related environment. It's very important not to be confused that the existing democracy is for the entire population. Based on the fundamental democratic framework that the government tries to implement with the support of UNHRC and the world dominant powers, the current regime is intending to demonstrate that they provide basic rights to the ethnic minorities. Now, you may have a question that I'm representing the resistant politics and talking against the Sri Lankan regime, and I'm returning back to Sri Lanka in coming days. So it seems for that there are flexibilities. I'm not denying that, as I stated in the beginning, the basic democracy has been resumed for different purposes and the public enjoys part of it, which does not mean the minorities have been provided the fundamental human rights. So I'm one among them. The ethnic minorities' fundamental attributes such as culture, economy and territory are still being structurally under threat. These are the underlying factors of the so-called good governance. The land grabbing is still ongoing in various forms. In one hand, symbolically, they release the military occupied pockets of lands, and in the other hand, the good governance grabs the lands in the name of development. Land grab is also highly linked to hybrid demographic modifications, which allows them to force Tamils as minorities in their electoral territories. The culture of ethnic minorities is still being destroyed in various forms. In a country where the good governance talks about reconciliation, the majoritarian Buddhist symbols are emerging day by day in Tamil areas. Tamils are not against Buddhism, but under singular Buddhist chauvinistic mindsets, this is definitely seen as forceful occupation. In an area where the economical structure is lacking, it has been replaced in singular Buddhist context. The resources belongs to and attached to the Tamil traditional values have been exploited without any considerations of the Tamil ownership. It may sound normal in a business development environment, but it will be definitely considered as destruction of economic background of the ethnic minorities in an environment where the singular Buddhist government is in power. So the regime change does not have anything to do with the 60 years of an ongoing ethnic oppression. For the time being, the people feel that they are temporarily free from the bombardment, shelling and explosions, but there's an uncertainty at the subconscious level of all the ethnic minorities. From the accountability to day-to-day life, the government fails to address the Tamils ethnic conflicts. In this context, the UNHRC and UN are trusting the current Sri Lankan government for accountability of the serious war crimes committed in this century without considering current local political situation, which is driven within the singular Buddhist mindsets. It is a singular Buddhist government because it based on the votes of the singular Buddhist fundamentalism. Instead of fulfilling the request of Western powers, the real meaning of good governance must be changing fundamentalist mindset of majoritarian singular people, which is not the case. Instead of addressing this real issue, a total regime has been formed where there is no opposition. The opposition party, which is Tamil National Alliance, becomes like a mouthpiece of the government, which can even be considered as the beginning of a fascist formation. The neighboring singular nation is denied to know the truth about the ethnic minorities. The so-called singular Buddhist government is contributing the above denial and still feeding the fundamentalism. Addressing the singular people is one of the important tasks to implement the hybrid investigation, which is the latest resolution passed by UNHRC. However, the Sri Lankan government has no intention to tell the truth to the singular people and implement transparent investigation mechanism. Instead, it feeds the singular Buddhist nationalism in the name of good governance, so that the hybrid investigation is and will be inactive, and therefore there is no ground for reconciliation. The post-regime change era might have some positive changes for big businesses, but we don't have the hope to address war crime accountability and reconciliation, which is extremely dangerous as people lost the trust in the United Nations and in so-called international community. A nation which has been denied self-determination rights is continuously attacked by internal, external factors and forces. War criminals are free to live among the people in Sri Lanka, which will encourage the war criminals all over the world. Therefore, the investigation is very important for any human being in the world, regardless race, ethnicity, and convictions. it becomes merely impossible in the Sri Lankan context, which is a threat to the existence of human community. Therefore, as one of the direct survivors of the war, I urge all the democratic and humanitarian forces around the world to join hand to hand with us to assume the basic existence of Tamil ethnic minorities and war crime investigations in Sri Lanka. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Kokilavanny. And now I have the pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Kisten.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. I must at the outset thank the presse-Geneva Press Club for the opportunity to be invited here and to ventilate all the issues that we are now raising. Just to introduce myself, I am a lawyer from South Africa, and I have been associated in solidarity work on many international issues, but also closely involved with the struggle of the Tamil people for justice in Sri Lanka. And I belong to an organization called the Solidarity Group for Peace and Justice in Sri Lanka, which is based in South Africa, and the main head area of our work is in the city of Durban. I want to indicate that in November 2015, our organization hosted approximately 16 organizations from the diaspora, and also included persons representative of organizations within Sri Lanka. And they were invited to a conference in Durban, which took place on the 6th and 7th of November. It was quite a historic occasion because all the diaspora organizations had come at our invitation, and one had no idea of what would be the outcome of such an exercise. But I will read you the recommendations that came from that Durban conference of the diaspora that was present. And maybe I should tell you at the outset, some of the organizations that were present there were the Tamil Civil Society Forum, the Organization for Surrendered and Disappeared, based in Jaffna, the Valikamam North Resettlement Rehabilitation Committee, the Tamil Ilam Liberation Organization, the Ilam People's Revolutionary Liberation Front, British Tamil Forum, U.S. Tamil Political Action Council, International Council of Tamil Ilam, representing 15 countries, the International Movement for Tamil Culture, Africa, South Africa, the World Tamil Organization, the TGTE, the Transnational Government of Tamil Ilam, and another 5 other organizations involving the Kazagam and the Kachi groups. And I will read you, and they all signed this declaration. And present at that conference were government representatives of the African National Conference and government, the South African government, Mr. Jeff Deutsch, who was the Consul General for Sri Lanka, whose term just ends, I think, this month. And also part of the conference was attended by Dr. Navanidham Pillai, who was a former UNHRC commissioner, and members of the Foreign Affairs Department of the South African government. So it was a conference that had a lot of credibility and support from institutions and government representatives inside South Africa and the ANC. And it was with all their involvement that this declaration was signed and agreed upon. I will read it, and it's still relevant today if you look at what has been said by the previous 2 speakers, and in my view it still states the position which is so important for us to focus on in going forward. It starts, the Tamil struggle for liberation and self-determination draws inspiration from the struggle of the South African people, led by the African National Congress, the ANC. The ANC has historically been supportive of the Tamil freedom struggle. It is in this light that the interest taken by the South African government in achieving accountability, justice, and sustainable peace in Sri Lanka is welcomed. The conference welcomes the initiative of the Solidarity Group for Peace and Justice in Sri Lanka in bringing together stakeholders from the Tamil homeland and the diaspora on the 6th and 7th November 2015 in Durban to debate and discuss the prospects for justice and permanent peace on the island. Peace and justice are not issues to be understood as distinct. Without justice, there can be no lasting peace. The Sri Lankan government's action thus far, and I would say up to now, as you've heard, under past and present regimes, provide little reason for Tamils in the northeast and the diaspora to believe that the government genuinely has the political will to deliver on accountability and lasting peace through a political solution. In order for the Tamil population to even begin to develop trust in any accountability, reconciliation, or constitution-building processes, the government must first undertake meaningful confidence-building measures. The following are preliminary recommendations to assist the international community, including the South African government, in their engagement with the Sri Lankan government towards achieving the aim of creating an environment in which justice and sustainable peace can be achieved. 1. The government of Sri Lanka co-sponsored the UNHCR resolution UNHRC 30L29 dated 1 October 2015 on accountability and reconciliation in Sri Lanka. However, during and after the adoption of the resolution, the government has been sending out conflicting messages about its obligations therein. Key members of the government are downplaying the need for international participation in the accountability process, and more particularly, the setting up of a criminal justice mechanism as part of the transitional justice process. The Sri Lankan government should clearly outline the aims and objectives of the transitional justice process pursuant to the resolution prior to the commencement of a credible victim consultation process. Successive governments of Sri Lanka, including the current regime, have publicly denied the systemic and structural nature of the crimes committed against the Tamil population. The war and the systemic crimes perpetrated against the Tamil nation were aimed at defeating its political demand for self-determination. The public acknowledgement of the systemic nature of the crimes committed with impunity against Tamils will be an important first step towards meaningful justice and lasting peace. The Sri Lankan government should acknowledge resolutions passed by the Northern Provincial Council, the Legislative Assembly of Tamil Nadu, and other democratic institutions and governments that reflect the shared experiences of the Tamil people over the years. We are disappointed that the new government not only continues to deny the ongoing militarization of the northeast of Sri Lanka, but has also taken steps to reinforce it. Militarization and occupation by armed forces of the Tamil homeland impedes a return to normalcy, including the return of and safe access to land and restoration of livelihood for the Tamil people. Despite pledges by the new regime to change the culture of impunity within the military, the heavy military presence continues to be a direct cause of ongoing sexual violence, harassment, and exploitation of Tamil women and girls in the northeast. Hence, the removal of troops from northeast and demilitarization of the area are important preconditions for establishing a safe and conducive environment for one, the victims and witnesses to take part in a victim consultation process, 2, an informed, participatory, and inclusive dialogue for a constitutional settlement to the national question. The continued proscription of the Tamil diaspora by the government of Sri Lanka is a serious obstacle towards the participation of members of the diaspora community in engaging with their brethren in the homeland to collectively work towards justice, peace, reconciliation, and socio-economic development. The Tamil diaspora is a constituent element of the Tamil nation. The delegitimization of this section of the Tamil community will obstruct an open and transparent process towards peace, justice, and resolution of the national question. The Sri Lankan government must proscribe all diaspora groups and individuals. We know that they've, a week after this conference in November, they proscribed a few organizations and maybe 50 or more individuals, but there are many who are still proscribed and many who are still on the list of people that cannot be regarded as safe. The Sri Lankan government must proscribe all diaspora groups and individuals. Real political will and commitment has to be demonstrated, allowing for diaspora engagement in the affairs of the Northeast. To create the necessary environment for exploring peace and justice in Sri Lanka, the government of Sri Lanka should also forthwith repeal the Prevention of Terrorism Act and the Sixth Amendment to the Sri Lankan Constitution, release a comprehensive list of detainees, list all political prisoners, disclose and close all secret camps, and abandon the rehabilitation programs for ex-LTTE cadres. The government should publicly acknowledge and act upon incidents of torture, intimidation, harassment, sexual violence, and white van abductions. Now, we know about the white van abductions. It's something people have written about, and it still carries on. And these are the unofficial paramilitary arm of the government posing as a democratic government, which uses these kind of mechanisms, these white vans that come in the middle of the night or wherever and kidnap people, and they disappear, and obviously tortured and in many cases killed. So I'll just reread that. And the should publicly acknowledge and act upon incidents of torture, intimidation, harassment, sexual violence, and white van abductions that continue to take place under the present government, as documented in the OISL report and reported by international human rights groups, NGOs, and Tamil civil society in the Northeast. The government should also allow open and unimpeded access for international NGOs and human rights organizations to the Northeast to continuously operate and monitor the state of human rights and human security. Lastly, since the end of the armed phase of the ethnic conflict, Tamils have not been allowed to remember their war dead freely. The act of unhindered memorialization is critical to reconciliation. The government should also give space for Tamils in the Northeast to remember their war dead without interference, intimidation, or reprisals from the state. So this was a declaration in November 2015, and which, as far as I would submit, is still very, very relevant today. There's been a lot of talk about the TRC processes and about the reconciliation that is now going on within the UNHRC and the international community. In my view, I don't want to talk too much about it, but I would like to end by saying those are just ideas that are going to stall the process for justice and peace. They have no real teeth in it. And it's a mistake, in my view, to talk about a TRC process in Sri Lanka. It is a mistake because the TRC processes, if you look at the earliest examples of TRC processes in Chile and in other areas that promoted the idea of reconciliation, and in South Africa, it has to be in the hands of the victims. It has to be in the hands of a government that has overthrown an illegitimate system, a racist system, an evil fascist system, or a violent system that destroyed the rights of people and was engaged in gross violations of human rights. You cannot in Sri Lanka have the perpetrators of war crimes and genocide investigating themselves. And for the UNHRC and other international governments that are supporting that type of illogical, unreasonable, irrational type of position makes no sense, except it gives Sirisena government just a friendly face. That's the only change from the past, but no difference. So my call is therefore that all these structures involved in the diaspora inside Sri Lanka and elsewhere need to talk about a proper plan. There have been processes and programs that have been put in place to look at an independent, organized investigation into the war crimes and to allow for free expression and information to come through. These have been done by organizations. I even have a document here which highlights that there was a research document called the Sri Lanka Monitoring and Accountability Panel, a roadmap to victims' justice. This sets out some sort of basis. It criticizes the internal judicial system as being very much a weak extension of the same government. So these are the kind of problems. It's nothing new. It's well researched. The argument is strong. In my view, it's clear cut. And I cannot see anything succeeding in the hands of the Sri Lankan government and certain other international governments that are trying to compromise on important principles that the United Nations and the UNHCR has set for itself to find justice in situations of genocide and war crimes. Thank you very much, Jay.
Thank you, Mr. Kisten. And now, for concluding, I have the pleasure to give the floor to Mr. Ponnambalam.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the Geneva Press Club for allowing this press conference to take place. This is, I think, the third time I've attended similar press conferences here in Geneva. For those familiar faces, my comments in the past have been primarily calling into question the actual motives behind the resolutions that have been passed regarding Sri Lanka since 2012. I have, at every available opportunity, tried to raise awareness with regards to possible dangers of the UNHRC resolutions not really having the intention of bringing about accountability, reconciliation, and a political solution in Sri Lanka, but rather a very short-sighted and a realpolitik motive of bringing about purely a regime change and nothing more. And it is in that context that that I think I'd like to make my comments today. Firstly, I'm glad I'm following Krish because I think he set the stage by asking some fundamental questions with regards to the direction in which the so-called implementation of the resolutions that have been passed, particularly the last one. I would like to put the context in which these resolutions were purportedly passed. From the very beginning, the Human Rights Council, when it took steps to pass resolutions on Sri Lanka, made it quite clear that the reason being that there had to be accountability with regards to purported mass crimes that had taken place, particularly in the last stages of the war. And the second reason was that that there had to be a political solution. Now, from a Tamil point of view, fundamentally those two criteria are correct. I think for this reason, that as victims that have been in conflict with the Sri Lankan state for the last 60-odd years, I think the primary goal is to make sure that there is non-recurrence. So for non-recurrence, the question of accountability and finding a political solution that makes sure that the Tamil people don't have to face the history that they faced in the future, I think is something that is fundamental. So in that sense, the stated positions with regards to those who sought to pass resolutions on Sri Lanka was something that certainly the Tamil people were interested in and would have wanted for that intention to be fully realized. Now, unfortunately, when the first resolution on Sri Lanka was passed in 2012, I'm not talking about the resolution that was passed soon after the war finished. I think it was quite clear that resolution was driven by those parties that were actually very supportive of the then regime. But certainly the 2012 resolution and all the resolutions that followed from that point is something that we need to look at more closely. The criticism has always been that those resolutions did not, whilst it purportedly, those resolutions were passed with the victims' interests at heart, a close reading of those resolutions will show that there was in fact no such intention, and the intention was just merely to bring about sufficient pressure on the then Rajapaksa regime that would create a scenario locally, that is in Sri Lanka, that would embarrass the Rajapaksa regime sufficiently amongst his electorate, so that the people will feel that Sri Lanka is becoming too much of a pariah state, and that it would be better to maybe opt for a regime change. The fact that at every opportunity the resolutions that were passed on Sri Lanka at no point was prepared to recognize that the Sri Lankan military, which is one of the main, if not the most important accused party, belongs to a state structure, irrespective of whichever party that is in power, and whichever party that is in power will have to, in fact, look into and safeguard the interests of the military, because the military has take such a major role in government. So the fact that the resolutions from 2012 right through till the last resolution in 2015 September called upon the government to conduct its own investigation is, I think, something that just completely makes a mockery of the notion of natural justice. Because as we know, governments can come and go, but the military will remain the same, and those interests will remain the same. And within the military structure itself, you have very, very prominent people in leadership positions that actually have affiliations to both political parties. So it is in this context that I think the resolutions on Sri Lanka will have to be looked at. We were told in September 2015 that the resolution was worded in diplomatic language so that foreign judges, investigators, lawyers, and what have you can get fully involved. But today it is quite clear that there is not going to be any such involvement. Both the President and the Prime Minister have made that quite clear, and have made it repeatedly clear that there will be no foreign judges. Of course, they have not in any way spelled out that there will not be foreign lawyers or getting involved. But the question is that it is those who judge that ultimately are crucial. And if you have the judges very clearly not giving some sort of confidence to the victims, then the chances of justice coming out of such a process is going to be almost nil. Given the context that post-regime change, you still continue to have the systemic problems that the state structures were creating, for example, white van abductions, torture, rape, sexual abuses, that was a part and parcel of the structures of the military and of governance during the Rajapaksa regime continuing, then the chances of the victims actually being comfortable enough to be involved in such a process is almost nil. So I think it is in this context that we have to see what future the UNHRC process is going to have. You have, unfortunately, the predominant Tamil political party that won the last general elections quite convincingly, whilst during the elections made it very clear to the electorate, that is the Tamil people, that a vote for them and a resounding victory for them would be a clear signal to the international community that an international accountability mechanism is what the Tamil people want, and that they will not be willing to compromise on such a process, and also insisting that a vote for them would mean that a fully fledged federal constitution that recognizes the Tamil right to self-determination will also be the clear message that will be given to the international community. Post-elections, of course, as recently as yesterday, the official spokesman has, of the TNA has stated that the government is going on the right direction. Their intentions and their decisions are correct, but that there has been no progress. This must be seen in the context where, like in the question of accountability, the President and Prime Minister making it very clear that there will be no foreign involvement. In the question of finding a political solution, despite a Tamil overwhelming mandate for a federal solution on the basis of the Tamil right to self-determination and the recognition of nationhood, the very same President and Prime Minister and his and very high-ranking members of the government have consistently and systematically rejected any notion of a federal arrangement to be granted in the new constitutional making process that is envisaged. So it is in that context, I think, that the Human Rights Council process ought to be viewed. I think if we are to bring about some change and certainly bring about some pressure in order to change this what I would call rather disastrous trajectory from a victim's point of view, then I think it is only possible if the victims themselves begin to make their voices heard and not try and allow proxies or their so-called representatives to voice their opinions. And I think whilst the victims must certainly come forward and make their voices heard, I think it is also imperative that those like Krish and his organization and many others around the world, really, that they too begin to speak out. There is a danger that many human rights organizations that have been very active in the UN Human Rights Council in raising red flags during the Rajapaksa regime actually going very, very quiet now. There was a report, and this I personally know, there was a report that came out from I forget the name of the organization, but a very key member, if not the head of that organization, was Yasmin Suka, who also is from South Africa. They came out with a report. First, they came up with two reports, one quite recently, but certainly for last September sessions, they came out with a report saying that post-regime change practices of the Rajapaksa regime continue, particularly white van abductions, torture, systematic sexual abuses continue, and many sort of international, generally respected human rights organizations decided to cast aspersions on Madam Suka as well as her institution, and in fact some of them actually approached me personally because members of our political party and activists had in fact were also aware of some of those facts that have been brought out in those reports. So I think hopefully organizations that claim to act on behalf of human rights will realize that particularly in the context of the Tamils and on the issue of accountability and political processes, that there has been absolutely no movement, and quite the contrary, it has been more to reinforce the Rajapaksa regime's sort of narrative that is going on, and that they must therefore stand in solidarity with the victims. If that happens, then I believe that there is room for us to bring about some change. If that doesn't happen, then the victims will go silent. Thank you.
So you have heard from four of us who expressed our views on the situation of Sri Lanka, and it's time for you in public to put up questions if you have any questions about the situation in Sri Lanka, and if you have any questions on the situation we expressed. Thank you.
Whilst we're waiting for questions, I think I personally would like to acknowledge the very powerful role that an institute like the Geneva Press Club plays. I think we must never underestimate the importance of the media and the courage of journalists throughout the world who are being killed and harassed and made to, well, often threatened to censor themselves, and even where they are immense dangers, they work under with a lot of courage. And I think no struggle in the world for justice and freedom would ever succeed without the ability to communicate and inform people and to have courageous journalists. Inasmuch as the Geneva Press Club gives everybody the right to be heard here and to be speaking, and even Rajapaksa had his days, I'm sure, here, and Sirisena and his team might, but the important thing is the right to debate and the right to be heard and to be given these opportunities is something we must never take for granted. As you know, in Sri Lanka there is a real problem about press freedom. It's limited in many ways, and journalists and editors of newspapers and other media structures have been killed, and under difficult circumstances they've been silenced. So I just wanted to acknowledge that on behalf of all concerned, that the importance of a free media in any part of the world, including South Africa, where I come from, where it's playing a very powerful role, keeps governments, even strong democratic governments, in check, exposes corruption in very so-called strong democracies, and also helps to expose illegal and unlawful actions of legitimate governments and their agencies within the countries, even the intelligence agencies, the normal police, and other political groupings. So, thank you.
So, if there are no questions from the public, we thank the Press Club for giving us the opportunity to express our views and hope all those hearing these interviews will stand for justice for all the people all over the world. Thank you.